Okay, materials and shaders. So everything in Unity is rendered with a shader. Those shaders within Unity are applied to materials, and those materials are applied to a render component of a game object. So I'm just going to show you. Okay. So I'm just going to open another project which I prepared. Where is it? Shaders. All right. So I've just opened a new project here. I've opened my scene. I forgot to talk about scenes. So scenes are like kind of, if you're making a game, then each level would be a scene. If you're making an experimental interface, then you've got two versions of it, then each one of those would be, don't try and pack everything in. If you've got two versions of something, don't try and make some sort of fancy switch within the same scene that, changes it to my other version. Just make two scenes. Just duplicate, make two scenes, and change the properties accordingly. So each scene is kind of a discrete environment or a discrete level, a discrete experimental interface, or whatever you're making.
And prefabs can be used across scenes?
Yeah. So a scene is I guess all a scene is a description of a hierarchy and all of the components, all of those game objects. So this scene that I've just loaded shaders, it just contains these game objects. And these game objects are 4 different shaders. Usually you won't need to write shaders. These ones I did write, but usually you won't need to write them, because Unity has, in the asset store, incredibly nice shaders that you can get for free. It's also got lots and lots of built-in shaders. Obviously, if you want to do something specific, then you will have to write your own shader. But I've just selected an object here. You'll see that the material is assigned within the mesh renderer. So if an object is a mesh, in order for it to be rendered, it must have a component called mesh renderer. So if I were to just come up here and create a new sphere, by default, there it is, it's got a mesh renderer attached to it. Because if it didn't have the mesh renderer, let me just delete that, you won't be able to see it. You'll be able to see this other thing, which I'll talk about in a second, in a few minutes. But it has this mesh renderer, and this mesh renderer has any number of materials associated with it. So let's just go to one of these objects. What we have here is a mesh renderer, and we have this material assigned to it. So it's got one material, and it's this vertex normal material. And then it has this shader, but that shader is part of the material rather than part of the game object. So you have game object, material, shader. Okay, so you assign the shader to the material and assign the material to the game object. So if I were to click at this vertex normals material, by the way, to create a new material, same as anything else. Oops, did not want to do that. Create material. Okay, that'll give you a new material, and you can assign a shader to that. So, what was it? It was this vertex normal material, and this vertex normal material, there's not much to it. All it has is an associated shader, and this shader that I have associated with it is called custom and vertex normals. These are the standard built-in shaders that Unity comes with. There's lots and lots of them, and there's many, many more that you can download from the asset store. So in general, you won't need to write your own shaders unless you want to do something very specific. But let's open this shader.
Should we change that setting?
Need to, yeah.
You're going to hate us.
Yeah. Right. It opened in mono developer. Okay. So what the shader does, it's very commented, I can send you the link to this. What the shader does is that it assigns vertex colors based on the normal of the vertex. So I won't go too much into this, but essentially this is a vertex shader. This is simply populating this with the normal of the vertex, and then in the surface shader, which is equivalent to a fragment shader or a pixel shader, it's assigning those vertex colors. So it's taking a standard mesh, it's looking at all the vertices and looking at the 3-unit vector of each of those normals and assigning it based on RGB. So when we press play, even before we press play, you can see what's happening. I'll just go back to the scene view. You can see that the color of the vertices on this object are varying with the normals. This I've used, I won't go too into that, I used a mask to generate the normal colors. This I'm blending 2 textures. So this is using this same mask, which I did in Maya, to blend these 2 textures to make a kind of earthy slash to green thing. And this over here is a vertex shader, which uses a sine wave to change the amplitude of the sine wave, basically. And I can change in real time properties of the shader to make extrude less or more. Okay, so I won't go into shader writing today, but the point is this in red here. Shaders assigned to materials, materials are assigned to game objects. If you want to look at the source code for the built-in shaders to Unity, then it's here. This can be quite useful if you want to learn shaders, then this can be a very useful resource actually. Unity in general is a very nice platform to do shader development because you see the results immediately, there's no compilation. So here you can find the built-in shaders. These are all the diffuse, all of the built-in shaders, lots and lots of them, so you can download them right here. All right.